free. Tons of Sobs, the very first free album, recorded in October, 5 days in October of 1968, but not released until March of 69. I'll come on to the reasonings behind that later. Just look at this great cover. I mean, look at this. You open it up, the full sort of gatefold. You can see it's a rather odd, almost menacing type picture, really. Then on the inside, there's a nice old gatefold sleeve. And you've got a picture of the band all looking pretty much half asleep, to be honest. You've got to take into account as well that these chaps were only sort of like 17, 18, 19 years old at the time. To put together an album like this is something pretty spectacular. So what about the album then? Well, first of all, Tons of Sobs. Why is it called Tons of Sobs? Well, two reasons. Tons of Sobs, or two meanings for Tons of Sobs. One, it's a term for sort of delta wailing blues or singing, and it's also a Cockney slang term for having loads of money. You go out with tons of sobs in your pocket, you can have a good night. So they're the two meanings of Tons of Sobs. I think it's a great title for an album. And as I said, it was recorded over 5 days in October 1968, but didn't come out until March 1969. Now, that was quite a long gap in those days from when an album was recorded to when an album was released. Now, the reasoning behind that was initially one of the tracks on this album was going to be called Visions of Hell, which was a track which I think was written by Andy Fraser and Paul Rodgers and was due to be on the album. Now, basically, this album is pretty much their live set at the time. Now, a part of that live set was a track called The Hunter, which everybody who's heard this album will know is on, but it wasn't initially going to be. It was going to be the track Visions of Hell instead, and The Hunter was sort of their big closing song at the end, and it was going down so well live they thought we better not leave it off the album. So they took the decision to put The Hunter, which of course was a cover version, and take their own composition Visions of Hell off the album. To be honest, Visions of Hell is a great song, but it's similar to Moonshine in some ways. It resurfaced many years later when the CD remaster came out, and on the box set Songs of Yesterday. It's a great song, and it would have been worthy of its place on the album, but the decision was taken to put The Hunter on, and you've got to say, in retrospect, that was a good idea. Another interesting thing about this album, as we said, it's called Tons of Sobs, which is rhyming slang for loads of money. It didn't actually cost loads of money to make. 800 quid, they reckon it cost to make this in October 1968. So what's on it then? Well, it's an interesting album. It's got a couple of covers on it, and it's got some tracks that lasted right the way through to the end of Free's career. Now, for the first track on it, the opening track is called Over the Green Hills. Now, it's Over the Green Hills Part 1 that kicks off side A, and Over the Green Hills Part 2 closes side B. Now, initially, when that song was written, it was written as a complete song by Paul Rodgers on his own before Free formed. But I think it was Guy Stevens who said, split it in half, put it at the beginning, bit at the end. Might sound like a bit of a wacky idea, but it worked, didn't it? And it was a great sort of start into the album with that sort of acoustic, dreamy sort of sound, and you're thinking, oh, what are we going to get next? What you got next was two belting rock tracks, really. Worry and Walk in My Shadow could well be as heavy as Free ever really got. And they were real proper sort of blues-based rock tracks, which again, Paul Rodgers had got prepared before Free even had their first practice session. The other tracks on side 1, Wild Indian Woman, probably one of the weaker cuts on the album, but it's still nice, bobbing along sort of song. The final track on side 1 is a blues cover, Going Down Slow, and it's quite clearly the purest blues track that Free ever recorded. You can see it gave the influence for tracks like Mr. Big and Heavy Load and stuff that Be My Friend even probably, that came a little bit later on, but it's a real proper blues barnstormer, and it's worth a price of admission alone just for that, really. But I could say that about every track on the album if I wanted to, couldn't I? So flip over to side 2 in the old vinyl days. And what do you kick off with there? Well, you kick off with one of my favourite Free tracks. And it must have been one of theirs as well. I'm a Mover. Now, I'm a Mover was the first song that Andy Fraser and Paul Rodgers wrote together. And they wrote it at their very first practice rehearsal session. How incredible was that? I've momentarily forgotten the name of the place. I think it was I'll put a thing up on the bottom because I'm just getting my nags heads and my Baptists and all sorts of things mixed up. But it was and a fickle pickle and all sorts of things like that, which is all a part of it. Anyway, the first practice session rehearsal, they wrote that track, and it stayed in the free set right until the end when Rabbit was in there and Tetsuya Muchi and Andy Fraser and Kossoff weren't playing with the band anymore. So it was obviously a bit of a favourite for everybody, that one, and it's a bit of a favourite for me as well. After that we get The Hunter, which obviously was recorded a little bit later than the rest of the tracks. You can't really tell, it sounds as though it was recorded at the same time. To me, they recorded it obviously in exactly the same way as they played it live. There's very, very little difference between that and the live stuff. And to be fair, this album is pretty much what their live set was at the back end of 68, early 69 anyway. Then we get Moonshine, which is a really sort of dark and menacing type track in many ways. Lyrically, it's almost makes you think more of Black Sabbath than Free, but it's great. And there's a few really good live versions of that kicking around as well on expanded editions and box sets and things. So that's another one that's just a little bit different to your normal Free track. Then we get Sweet Tooth, which is the last proper track on the album, and that's one that's definitely got Steve Miller playing the piano. And the interesting thing about this track is that you can tell Paul Rodgers has got either the beginnings of a cold or the end of a cold, depending on whether it was recorded on the 1st or the 5th of the date, I presume. He's just got a little bit of sort of nasal where you can get a bit of a cold in the vocal, but it doesn't stop it still being absolutely brilliant, and that is a great track. And then you go into the second part of Over the Green Hills, which finishes the album off. Now, what a start. I mean, you're talking about 4 people here. Paul Rodgers, Andy Fraser, Paul Kossoff and Simon Kirk. I don't think any of them were 20 yet. And this album is just so bluesy. It's the bluesiest Free album by a long way. In some places it could be even heavier. Things like Warrior Walk in My Shadow. They are pretty stomping sort of blues-based rock songs. It's a brilliant album. If you get it now on CD, you don't quite get the nice fold-out gatefold sleeve, but you do get a bunch of extra tracks and different versions. It's well worth getting hold of for that. It's a great start for a band who everybody knows are my second favourite band, just marginally behind a certain band called Deep Purple, but these are pretty much close to it. And another interesting thing about this is it gives me a chance to do something that I always forget to do, because people keep telling me I've got to ask people to subscribe and to like and to do all that sort of stuff. Self-promotion, I'm rubbish at self-promotion, but today I'm going to do a bit of double self-promotion, because not only am I going to ask you to like and subscribe like I've just done, I'm also going to show you this. Now, this is a book. There you go. It's called Rock and Roll Fantasy, and it's the musical journey of Free and Bad Company, and it's put together by This Day in Music Books, and it features contribution from me about that particular album. So if you want to hear what I think about it in a little bit more detail, let's have a copy of this great book, which has got a little snippet of me in there somewhere. I should have earmarked the page, shouldn't I? But I'm even in the index at the back, so that's pretty good. So, Tons of Sobs, Free, the first album from one of the best bands ever, and a bonus of a book, Rock and Roll Fantasy, the story of Free and Bad Company.